record a quick message about how to select a good research topic for your MPhil or for your PhD research. It's very, very important that you select a good topic for PhD research because with the wrong topic, it is very difficult to correct mistakes later on, and you may be working on your PhD for many years and then discover that it doesn't take you to the right place. A PhD is a very long research project. It is like a marathon run. It is very, very important that you have full commitment right from the start for many, many years. And for that reason, it is very important that you select a topic that is appropriate and that you also like. So for me, the first point when selecting a topic is always, does this topic touch your heart? Does this topic arouse in you some feelings of commitment? Commitment can be of different kinds. It could be very simply be that you like a particular aspect of history. You like a particular aspect of history because you've read about it. You like a book about a particular topic. It could be that you have come across a particular topic in your family life. You're interested in your own family's history, for example. You visited an old building. You've come across a historical event that you were very impressed by. Maybe you've seen something in the media, but it has to be something that really touches you. Very often it can be a political or social commitment. So for example, if you come from a province of Pakistan like KPK or Balochistan and you feel that your history hasn't been noticed enough in mainstream history writing, and you want to bring it to the attention of people, you want to write about it, research about it, that's a very, very strong commitment that will drive you in your selection of a topic. Or you may be a feminist, you may be interested in women's rights, you want to highlight the role of women in history. And again, that's a very strong political commitment that can carry you quite far. And sometimes people are simply driven by particular sources. They like particular historical sources and they want to work on them. So for example, when I started a research project recently, which was on magic in Urdu print culture, I simply started this project because I came across compilations in the library that I found very interesting, and I was touched by them and I wanted to know more. And that really prompted my research. It could also be that you are interested in a particular methodology, for example, oral history. If you like to talk to people, if you like to hear from members of the older generation how they experienced history, then that'd be a very good way and a very good starting point to think about your project. So always start with something you really like and you have a very strong commitment for, because if you pick a topic that you're not feeling passionate about, if you have 3 or 4 different topics that are all equally dear to you and not really dear to you in the end, then you will not have the kind of commitment you need to see a PhD through, because it takes a lot of emotional strength to finish a PhD. It's not an easy task. So I would always say, start with your passion. Seek your advice from your supervisor, of course, when you adjust your topic and turn your topic from an idea into a proper topic that can be approved by your university, but always start with something that you're passionate about. The next step, and it's really the most important step in selecting a good PhD topic and creating a good PhD topic, is to be aware of the literature. So a literary survey, literature review, historiography is absolutely key to selecting a good topic. You have to know what literature is already out there on your chosen topic in order to position your own research work in an appropriate way. And it is really worth taking a lot of time over this. So what I do is I actually sit down and try to think about all the different areas that are adjacent to my chosen topic, where I could find some inspiration for reading. Very often people start with a particular research topic and they think nobody has ever written anything about this, or there is very little literature available about this, and then they stop. But I would say you can always find relevant literature to fine-tune your topic simply by thinking about your topic in a more methodical way. And one method that a colleague of mine has suggested to me, and which I still use and which I find very, very useful, is to work with a diagram. You could use either concentric circles, or you could produce Venn diagrams using overlapping circles. So we'll just demonstrate this to you using one of my own research topics that I've recently engaged with. As I've said, I've recently written an article on the subject of magic themes in Urdu print culture in colonial India. So I start with my actual topic, which would mark a very small circle at the center of the diagram that I'm now going to produce. So this would be Urdu print magic. Or it could be your topic, whatever topic you have chosen. Now you may find, as I found in this particular case, that there is very little literature available on this particular topic. But that doesn't mean that there isn't any literature I can make reference to. So my question then would be, well, within what bigger field is Urdu print magic located? And I can identify at least two other spheres that are grouped around it. The first one would be Urdu print culture. So my next question would be, well, what literature is now available in the field of Urdu print culture? Where can I read up? And I will very quickly find that even if I don't have any literature on Urdu print magic itself, there is quite a large body of writing on other forms of Urdu print material, sensationalist novels, horror stories, and that kind of thing. And I can get some idea of where to position my own research subject with that. The other circle, of course, is the wider literature on magic. And because Urdu print magic was used by people from all religious communities, that would include Islamic magic, Persian magic, but also Hindu magic, things like Tantra. So I would then go and search for the specialist literature in those fields. And then there's an even bigger circle, which is about the theme of magic in historiography more generally. How does magic relate to modernity? There's a big literature, particularly by sociologists, on questions like, does magic disappear as the world has become?
Do people turn their back on magic? Do they turn to science? And we get a lot of literature in that particular field, and some very big names. Max Weber and other founding fathers of sociology, they all come in here at this largest, almost the widest circle. So you can see that for any given topic, if you go through several rounds of moving to a general and more general levels, you would always be able to produce a literature review, even if you feel that the particular topic that you want to work on has not been covered yet. And of course, the ideal scenario for a very good research topic is that there is little literature about, your more specific topic, the thing in the center, in my case, Urdu print magic, because that means you can make your own contribution and it will be taken very seriously. But you do have other literature that you can relate to in adjacent fields. So that is very important. If you can pitch yourself in an empty space, but an empty space that's not completely empty, which is related to other fields where other people have already written something about. You can also do a very similar exercise, which I, don't really need to write up, in terms of overlapping circles. So you could think about, which different fields overlap with my particular topic. So if my topic is Urdu print magic, you could say it sits at the intersection between print culture, Muslim magic, tantric thought, Western styles of magic, and it sits within a bigger circle of cultural history of colonial India at that particular period. It's really, really important that you do this literature review work very thoroughly before you finalize your topic. At the very least, you have to be able to work with a reading list of a dozen titles that identify the most important works for each of these circles. Because if you don't get that right, you can very easily get into problems later on. The biggest cause for me that academic work coming from Pakistan is being rejected for international publication is that it doesn't acknowledge the literature fully, or that it talks about something that other people have already done. The most important consideration when designing a research project is what I would call is finding the gap. Finding how your work relates to work that's already in existence, and identifying very clearly what contribution your work makes. And it has to be a novel and creative contribution. It has to identify a new area that other people have not done a lot of work on, or maybe no work on at all. So identifying the gap is perhaps the most important task when designing a research topic. If you design a research topic that goes over familiar material and simply restates an argument that somebody else has already made in the past, you will not be able to publish that research internationally, because it will not make a unique and new contribution to the field. And of course, a PhD is all about making a new contribution to the academic field. So finding and identifying the gap where you position your own research is very, very important. In some cases, your work can be a critique of already existing work. So somebody else has already done some work on something, but you feel that that person has not done a good job, has overlooked certain aspects, has probably used the wrong sources or not considered the right kind of sources when carrying out their research. In that case, you can also treat that as your gap. You can offer a critique of somebody else's work, but that also means that you have to be very careful to actually really demonstrate that your own work is better, uses better sources, and offers a better argument than existing work. In case of doubt, I would always say it is much better to pitch a new research project in a fresh field, and not simply to offer a critique of existing work, but to go away and really identify an area where nobody has done any work about so far. And in order to find out, you have to know what other people have done, and the literature review is the first step. Once you identify your gap, and you really know this is the field where I want to make my contribution, it is worth thinking about the time period and the geographical scope of that field more carefully. Because you have to select a particular time period, you have to select a particular space in order to pitch your research, and you can play around with that in a creative way in order to make sure that you're really addressing a new field, a new ground. So, for example, if somebody else has already covered a particular topic within a time period that ends but doesn't go beyond a certain time period, you may pitch the following decade, for example, as a correct as an empty space in which you can pitch your own research. You also have to really think carefully about what time period you select. Each time period starts with a particular date and ends with a particular date. And these dates have to have a certain importance for your field. So you shouldn't simply pick a decade, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, or political divisions, the period 1947 to 1958, when democracy failed in Pakistan, or 1958 to 1970, when the military was in power. Because this is only appropriate if your field is also political history. But if your field is social history or cultural history, maybe you have to think again about what key dates apply to your own field, and you have to select a key date from within that from within that range. Also think about the space. Very often people just simply pick a space that they think is obvious. So they, for example, talk about Pakistan as the appropriate space of their analysis. But then they only talk about one province, Punjab, let's say, because for them, Pakistan and Punjab is one and the same thing. So make sure when you think about the space for which you conduct your inquiry that it actually covers everything that needs to be covered, is also aware of what's going on in other spaces, and is very explicit about what space you pick. So if you are only working on Punjab, then say that you're actually carrying out your topic within a Punjabi framework, and then also be aware of the limitations that your argument poses if you confine it to one particular space. Okay, finally, I want to say a little bit also about the methodological framework and how to pick the right methodological framework, which is something that people are very anxious about. particularly if you feel you don't really know what the appropriate framework should be, but the rules of a PhD require you to have a particular explicit methodological framework that you have to state up front. I would say be a little bit less anxious about this. The most important factor in determining whether it is a good PhD or a bad PhD for me is still the amount of empirical research work that has gone into it. You can have a very fancy, very fashionable methodological framework. You can try to make your topic appealing to what you think is now required in Western academia. They are talking about women's rights, so I should write about women's rights, for example. All of this will not produce good work unless you are actually putting in a lot of empirical spade work. You have to find out the facts within your field. You have to accumulate the facts. You have to analyze them. And that is where the success of your PhD project will rise or fall. This is, what predicts the success of your PhD project. So if you send your research later, let's say, to an international journal and you want to be published, people can ask you to adjust your methodological framework. But if you haven't done the empirical work, then there is no substance to your article and they will reject it. But if there is good substance, you have found new material that people haven't seen yet, then you can work with different theoretical frameworks later on and adjust them according to what your argument requires. So in the first instance, really be confident that good, solid empirical work counts and counts for very much. Now, when choosing a methodological framework, there's different ways you can go about this once you've done your empirical work and you've made sure that the empirical work is there. Some people simply have a theoretical mind. They're very interested in theory to begin with, but they are not usually struggling with the methodological framework. They have read books on theory, they got fascinated by them, and in many cases this is actually really what defined their project in the first place. There are people who simply like theory, they like reading the work of Michel Foucault or other theoreticians. Maybe they are feminist scholars who've read a lot of feminist theory because they're very much invested in the women's question, women's rights, and so on. Then that naturally leads them to a particular methodological framework that comes directly from their political commitment. But if you're not in that camp and you're somebody who starts with empirical facts, I would always say keep your methodological framework simple and only go for a methodological framework when it actually helps you to make a better argument. So whatever you can say in simple language without having to use a theoretical framework, say it. It probably doesn't require a methodological framework to become better. A methodological framework is useful when you reach the limits of your own research, when you hit a boundary, when you feel, okay, I've looked at all the documents, but they're still not really answering my question. So how can I think about the question more carefully in order to find answers? And then theory can really help you and take you forward. And the other context, of course, where theory is always helpful and methodology is always necessary for a historian is when you encounter your sources. The first step for any historian, any historical work, is to have a critical approach to your sources. Who produced those sources? What was the ideology of the person or the institution that produced a certain body of sources? What are the limitations of those sources? Ultimately, these are also theoretical and methodological questions. So, for example, when you work a lot with colonial sources, as I have, post-colonial theory is a really useful way to check and be critical towards your source base. If you've read a bit of Edward Said, for example, about Orientalism, you will know that Western sources and Western writers and colonial officials depict reality in a particular way. And that is not necessarily the truth. You have to know their limitations and biases. And sometimes there's the structural ways in which they create a particular impression of what South Asian society is like. So here theory can really help you to produce better theoretical work, better historical work. But ultimately, I would just say be very confident in the importance of empirical work and use methodology only insofar as it actually helps empirical work. Don't use theory for ornamentation or to create some relevance. It will not make your work any better. There is, of course, some value in referring to well-known theorists if you want to be noticed internationally, because well-known theorists are almost like a common language that other scholars can also relate to. So, for example, if you write about the women's question and you're using some feminist theory, then some of those writers, and they're often Western writers, would also be familiar to scholars working on Latin America or China or Africa or Europe, other parts of the world, who would be using the same theorists. And then it can be useful to make reference to them, simply to have a common language so other people have a way of engaging with you. I think these are the most important points that I wanted to make. So just to repeat, when you design your own research project, always start with something you're passionate about. Your passion can come from various sources. Can come from politics, it can come from enjoyment, it can simply from interest. You like something, but it's important that there's some passion there. Second, be very, very careful with your literature review. When you do your literature review, take your time. Don't be put off when you feel that there isn't enough literature there that already covers your subject. There always is, if you use an exercise like the concentric circles that I've put down here on the board. I'm sorry, okay. And then finally, when you think about the methodological framework, then identify your gap. I think that's the single most important question. Make sure that whatever you design your research project about is in a field that nobody else has directly targeted, so you can make your own contribution. And finally, with regards to methodology, use it as far as necessary, but don't use it for ornamentation. And don't be distraught or disheartened if methodology is not your strong point. Empirical work is still the most important hallmark, the quality standard for good historical work.